And what is up, everybody? I know we're a ways away from Veterans Day, and it's not Memorial Day. I'm not doing a PTSD rant, but as you can tell by the link, this theme is military toys, military action figures, and it's something that I grew up on because the fact that G.I. Joe: Real American Hero came out the year that I was born. So I've always had a very spiritual connection to G.I. Joe, especially Snake Eyes. And the thing about it is, like, yeah, G.I. Joe was like synonymous with military action figures, but for a long time they haven't been the only game in town. I mean, they were probably back in the 60s was when it was first created, when it was the first ever 12-inch action soldier, action sailor, action marine, action pilot. But once a Real American Hero came out, that was no longer the case. And today I'm gonna go through all of that, and it's pretty interesting because starting off, I have here the complete encyclopedia to G.I. Joe, 3rd edition. However, it only covers up to 2001. Like, it's got stuff. This was given to me by a friend who personally knew the author, and this gets into, it basically covers everything that nothing that the toys that made us hadn't already made mention of. Including, they got colored pictures of the original concept for G.I. Joe, which was a wooden doll, those wooden artist mannequins with a Ken head. that was the original concept doll that was basically sold in order for Hasbro to come up with the idea for what eventually became the G.I. Joe that we come to know and love today. But at the same time, it isn't the same G.I. Joe that we've come to know and love today. What we're going to get into here is, my father, before he passed away, had a pretty big collection of the classic 1960s G.I. Joe dolls that Hurricane Irene decided he didn't need anymore. And rather than try to get them restored, especially for those that had the actual hair, it just wasn't worth the trouble. So a majority of them were thrown away. I have no idea where most of them are. But once it came to, it came around time for me, 1982, here came the vintage G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero figures. You got classic Grand Slam, except this is the one with the bicep swivel. The original ones didn't have it. You have version 2 of Snake Eyes, who was like one of the most sought after Snake Eyes figures. Unfortunately, I don't have any of his accessories, not even timber. You got the second version of Gung Ho here, and that sword just has that, even though that looks nothing like the Marine Corps NCO sword, but he's got it there. He's in his dress blues, and this is another very sought after figure. Then, of course, my other brothers, you got Leatherneck and the first real life G.I. Joe. You got Sergeant Slaughter. I met Sergeant Slaughter in the 2013 Comic-Con. It was hilarious because, unfortunately, like, I have a video posted of when I went to that Comic-Con and meeting Jason David Frank and Larry Hama, but what I don't have is when I met Sergeant Slaughter, who is, my battery was dying, and I forgot that he was going to be there. And someone's telling me, like, I can't believe you forgot the sergeant was going to be here. So, it's like $40 for a picture and an autograph of this. I said, well, I don't have enough money for any of that. All I want to say is Semper Fi, brother. He reaches over, hoorah! basically just smacks his hand into mine, gives me, massive handshake. It was awesome to do that, to share that kind of camaraderie with somebody like him. It's, it was truly an honor. But of course, with every good toy line like this, you have, I don't want to say haters, but definitely some copycats. In comes the core. The core literally ripped off that 3 3/4 inch look, the bicep swivel, the classic O-ring waist, and be able to bend up and down like that. And I guess they use something different. And this is made by these were made by Lennard Toys, which was ultimately, I don't think they sell their stuff anywhere else but Walmart. I think that's the only place that they sell their toys. In 1994, G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero had stopped, and especially after the whole Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat figure craze, which was awful, but because those were the only figures they had for Street Fighter and for Mortal Kombat, you bought them anyway. But this is what was supposed to be the successor to A Real American Hero. Enter Sergeant Savage and his Screaming Eagles. Sergeant Savage is basically a knockoff Captain America, a soldier who was cryogenically frozen and experimented on from World War II, and then woken up in the present day being, the mid to late 90s. And they were going in a different direction, and as you could see, this is the classic 3 3/4 inch line, and Sergeant Savage stands a good inch taller than the classic 3 3/4 inch line, kind of like with Visionaries. Visionaries had the exact same points of articulation as did, G.I. Joe, but they were much taller. Even if you remember, Cops back in the late 80s looked, same, pretty much the same articulation. The difference being that you could swivel their wrist, and they ultimately were 6 inches instead of 3 3/4 inches. This had only one episode. It was a VHS that came packaged with this particular figure. The animation was awful, the storytelling was awful, but the only reason anybody knew this was supposed to be the successor to A Real American Hero was due to the fact that General Hawk was in the cartoon. That's it. And it was, and basically everything went from G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero to the Screaming Eagles, and that failed miserably. But what failed miserably, but not as miserably as Sergeant Savage, was G.I. Joe Extreme. And this here is the G.I. Joe Extreme Sergeant Savage. If you didn't think he was juicing before, you could clearly see the difference. Apparently what happened was, once Hasbro acquired Kenner, this was more or less the design for the Aliens toy line, the Aliens vs. Predator toy line, the Colonial Space Marines. And basically what they did was they redesigned them, repackaged, repainted them to come out looking like this. And this was G.I. Joe Extreme. And it was awful. The toys kind of looked cool, but for the most part the cartoon was awful. The toy line didn't do too well. And, when you go from all this articulation, the 13 points of articulation that the vintage Joes had, to even having, like this one, it's an inch taller than the 3 3/4. However, it's a swivel at the waist. It's not an O-ring, as you can see right here. I can't hold this camera, unfortunately. It's a swivel at the waist. See, it's not that classic O-ring. So it wasn't exactly the same points of articulation, but everything else was more or less the same. You go from, from 13 or 12 to 5, which Kenner was notorious for. Kenner's action toy lines never really had any more articulation than just these 5 points. That's all they were ever known for. The DC superheroes line, that being superpowers, their all their Batman toy lines, pretty much the same thing. Once everything was acquired by Hasbro, not much had changed either. On top of that, back in the late 90s, I'm forgetting one special thing. Actually, while Real American Hero was still pretty much going strong, they came out with the 12-inch G.I. Joe Hall of Fame. And I got gung-ho because, he's a Marine. And that's him in his dress blues, just like this particular figure, despite the fact that they made a bunch more incarnations of him that were just absolutely awful, including another incarnation of Leatherneck, which absolutely sucked. And the interesting thing about G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, out of the 100 plus members that they had on that roster, only 9 of them were Marines. Yeah, there's a reason why they call us the few. So you go from this to this to this, and now this. And there was a short period of time that nothing was really happening with G.I. Joe, with the exception of Kenner putting out 12-inch dolls similar to this young man right here. This is a 12-inch doll of an amateur Marine Corps boxer. It comes with a championship belt, these gloves that clearly are not boxing gloves, and some headgear. And he's wearing an actual Marine Corps boxing team uniform, which is good. These were going on until, without a Real American Hero. Granted, Toys R Us was constantly putting out G.I. Joe Real American Hero repaints and remakes of this classic style. But something odd also started happening. Now, done in the style of G.I. Joe Extreme were these mini military figures, back in the 90s, which unfortunately I don't have any of, that were, you could clearly tell they were mini knockoffs of G.I. Joe Extreme. It had that same blocky 5-point of articulation, that same blocky style, but these are made by Excite. Hasbro made G.I. Joe. The cores made by Lennard. These were made by Excite. And it's interesting because now Excite, the only 2 branches of service that they make these figures for is Army and Navy. It's got the Army and Navy SEALs. That's it. I actually called the company up, for a specific reason. And now, these came out, I don't know when, but apparently this company had been in, he said that 9 years ago they were doing this. I don't remember but I remember these from all the way back in the 90s. Almost 20 years ago now. But he didn't say anything about, because like I said, this particular, look at how this M4 is held in his hand. It's bigger than his hand. On top of that, it's got a split in between the pistol grip. It's like, how are you going to have a split between the pistol grip like that? Because unfortunately it couldn't fit in his hand any other way. They had stuff like that in the 90s, and this guy looked completely different. I'm telling you, these were originally knockoffs of G.I. Joe Extreme. The core was still going strong, and of course, the vintage G.I. Joe line constantly being remade, repackaged, revamped, and repainted. By the way, that's a bullet in my dog, and one of my original dog tags. Then came the 12-inch dolls. This was made by Hasbro. This one was done by Hasbro, but there are ones done by Kenner in boxes, kind of similar to this. And they, it was strict. It wasn't a real American hero. It was stuff, generic stuff like Desert Trooper, Marine Desert Trooper, Marine and Mop Gear, stuff like that. In 2001, they tried another revamp, repackage, Toys R Us exclusive only. But then they decided to do G.I. Joe, a real American hero, versus Cobra. And I already showed you the Karate Fighters of Duke versus the Neo Viper. However, one of the main problems that particular toy line had, it was, two per package. You had a G.I. Joe member versus a Cobra member. And right here I have, again, my Marine brother, Gung Ho, who traded his 8-point cover for a patrol cap. I don't understand that. And here, again, rather than, they dumb down the articulation as well. Getting rid of the O-ring, still has the bicep swivel, still bends at the knees, but you can't do the splits like classic Joes can. You can sit straight down, and that's pretty much it. Now, and this was back in 2000. This is back early 2002. I remember when these came out because I had just finished being laid off from Toys R Us Times Square. And what's he doing with this big pistol? I have absolutely no idea. And this knife on the side. And I never liked the look of these. Even, Snake Eyes being my favorite, I saw the figure that they had for it, and I absolutely hated it. I wanted nothing to do with it. And what winds up happening is, a few months later, they come back with a new line of G.I. Joes. But this time, they added a little extra articulation. This is their second version of Snake Eyes, but this was for the G.I. Joe Spy Troops. They have ankle articulation. That was the first time that being introduced. Very few of them actually had this. They brought back the O-ring. He's able to do the splits again. And also articulation at the wrist. Something that was not something they were not capable of prior to that. Like I said, you could do that with the cops, but you couldn't do that with G.I. Joes, and I don't think you could have done that with the Visionaries either. But the fact they were able to do this with these was great, and this was my favorite Snake Eyes figure for a long time. But something interesting happened. Remember how, like I said, they got the haters? So, copying this style of G.I. Joes, Leonard brought out new Elite action figures, and I don't even have to show you. It is literally the same articulation. Only thing is like the figure is much more cartoony, and the plastic is much softer. It's not the same hard plastic as Gung Ho here. It's a much softer, almost pliable plastic. And like I said, this guy is much more cartoon looking than anything. And it was a much cheaper alternative to G.I. Joe at the time, and to be honest, it still is. That doesn't mean that it's better. After G.I. Joe Spy Troops and after Valor versus Venom, it got to the point where they needed something new, and picking up immediately where Valor versus Venom was released. Immediately after comes the next evolution of a real American hero. We got Sigma 6. G.I. Joe Sigma 6 was awesome. The toys, not the cartoon. The cartoon was absolutely awful. It was an anime, and they really should have stuck to their guns. But these particular figures, the articulation is amazing. The collectability, and then of course the playability, due to the fact that this is a very, very sturdy plastic. It doesn't feel very delicate. These things, stood, obviously much taller than 3 3/4. Here is 3 different versions of Snake Eyes right here, and that's Grand Slam. And let's get Grand Slam next to his next evolution. Now, and I say, because of playability and collectability, the accessories came in these foot lockers. And I'm actually capable of fitting Snake Eyes into this foot locker. I can't do that with Grand Slam. The foot locker came as end caps. End caps you could open up and, of course, fit all the accessories, very removable accessories, into the foot locker. Then, of course, you got Grand Slam's. I don't know what this is. Grand Slam was supposed to be a jetpack trooper, and he's got 4 different projectiles that he shoots out of this massive thing. That unfortunately I got it on eBay, and this particular weapon wasn't complete, but I got this huge Grand Slam figure who was just, dude's just awesome. Dude is just a big buff military dude. And again, this plastic is just, super, pretty tough, tough enough. So collectability and playability was something that this had. This particular Snake Eyes, the accessories that he had, everything that he was able to come out with, like even the detail put into it. If I could just get the handle for the tonfa blade. He could hold it like that, but I'm not going to do that. Of course, he had this modular armor, which you were able to use these pegs to stick onto him. And then, of course, just like with the sword, little detail they have here. Look, you can see the little bullet that came out of the magazine of his Uzi. And I love that they have an Uzi, because that was always one of Snake Eyes' trademark weapons, even from when he was a commando to even as him being this particular ninja. Not necessarily this one, but he was an Army Ranger first, so he's not holier than thou when it comes to using a gun. And like I said, the Corps copied, the Corps was constantly copying G.I. Joe. I don't know when it was that these next things came out, but before I get into that, apparently from what they said from what I heard from Toy Galaxy, people weren't particularly happy with this being the successor to A Real American Hero. I don't understand why, but then in 2007, the 25th anniversary of G.I. Joe, they came out with the 25th anniversary line. Now, these are not part of the 25th anniversary line. 25th anniversary line were just revamps of those classic Joes. This is a Beachhead from the movie, and this is Snake Eyes from the first movie, but he was this design was after G.I. Joe Resolute, which also had its own line of G.I. Joe figures done in that 25th anniversary style. It came in the figure stands, and basically the exact amount of articulation you would get from a Marvel Legends action figure. You know, these were cool. The problem was they're so small. And as far as playability or anything like that, the accessories that they came with, I've lost about half of them. Granted, I've only had these on display, and between like constantly having to take them out of boxes, put them away somewhere, and stuff like that, I've lost, you know, most of the accessories. And even with Snake Eyes, who didn't require that much, came with a bunch of stuff that I don't have anymore. But once again, the biters come out with something like this. This is a new wave of the core Elite, and granted, it's definitely more articulation than this one, definitely more detailed than this one or this one, but still not as good as the originals. And then they even try coming out with a completely different military toy line, to which these two figures were, but they were repainted and reissued as part of the core. And as a matter of fact, these were also repainted and reissued in Leonard's exclusive to Walmart Rampage toy line. So these, the only articulation they have is in the shoulders, and that's it. You know, these guys are absolutely worthless. And these come in 3-packs. These particular figures now started coming in 3-packs and get packaged with with some form of vehicle or some form of accessory. You have a drone here, and here you have a dirt bike. But they go even further with the ripping off, because I present to you the core super soldiers. You got to be freaking kidding me. Because first off, I have these guys standing 2x2 for a reason. Because each one of these, the heads, all original pieces. The bodies, on the other hand, I mean, look at the torso, look at the hands. Repaints. This one with the, you know, torso and legs, hands, repaint, rehash, repaint, with the exception of the head. And look at these guys. These legs, 6 different characters, all different reused parts, all different repaints. And these characters are not even available in this scale. That makes absolutely no sense. They go through the trouble of creating a whole new line of figures that is clearly biting off of Sigma 6. Now, these don't have the same articulation as Sigma 6. All of their waist articulation is so ridiculously loose. All of them are like that. See? And, you know, no wrist articulation, but you got the bicep swivel. That's about it. You got these, you do the splits, and you got a bend at the knee, and that's pretty much it. These are thick, blocky figures. And then he only comes with what looks like a flare gun. I was like, seriously, that's the best you could arm him up with. But then this guy right here, who is who is the particular bad guy, got the exact same weapon. The other guys got, all 4 of them have different rifles. These guys are the only ones that get these, what look to be flare guns. And the only one I really like out of these, and granted, they all do kind of look cool. I mean, definitely something better than the ones up here, but still a complete knockoff of what was G.I. Joe Sigma 6. I mean, come on. As a matter of fact, look. I'm going to put Grand Slam's helmet on. Look. Clearly nothing original about that. Like, The only thing that I like about this is this guy, his name is Roughneck. First off, Slash, I forgot his name. All I know is that he's a Japanese police officer, military police officer. Oculus, Crane, because he's a Shaolin monk, that's racist. And Dynamite, and you got the exact same body as him, so I don't know what's up with that. Maybe they were trying to go for Ken and Ryu, but this gentleman right here is Roughneck, and Roughneck is a Marine, and they got him wearing army stripes pointed downwards. I don't understand that. And the reason he was called Roughneck is because after he got out the Marine Corps, he went into oil drilling. But at the same time, all this is going on between Lennard and Excite Toys and Hasbro. Blue Box International. I remember these guys. They came out in the the late 90s, early 2000. Early 2000. Reading about them in Toy Fair magazine, they were that company made Rookie of the Year especially for some of the video game toys that they were coming out with. I haven't seen any video game toys coming from them. A majority of them I see coming out from NECA, and NECA does some great stuff. But they decided to throw their lot in with the military action figures, because lo and behold, here is Elite Force. This here is a Marine. He normally comes in a pack of 4. With it's actually 5. Comes with 5 Marines. All of them have call signs, like code names, just like G.I. Joe. But he comes with Marines, but they also have packs of Navy SEALs, of Army Delta Force, and this here is one of the vehicles for Elite Force. Now these are sold only in Target and in Kmart. Those are the only places you could get those. But back to Excite. Excite, like the soldier I got from the soldier I was able to get from Five Below, and the Navy SEAL I got from a drugstore. But these are sold in TJ Maxx, in Burlington Coat Factory, in Macy's, basically places you normally don't go or you don't think of when it comes to buying toys, unfortunately. However, I was talking with the guy from Excite, and it turns out they did something that was sold specifically to a place where you think about toys. Enter